Football!
What is up? Welcome in GC Live Monday episode of the show. Wes Mitchell here with Chris Clark. As always, going to be breaking down the Gamecocks 24-14 victory over Kentucky on Saturday night. A game, frankly, I didn't even think was as close as maybe the final score indicates. South Carolina getting we talked about it all last week. A massive win for them. The first road SEC victory of the Shane Beamer era. Just really taking care of business in the second half after, I kind of wondered, y'all, 7-7 at the half. You felt like South Carolina had outplayed Kentucky for the most part, but you were sort of wondering, is this going to be one of those games where you look back on the missed opportunities and say South Carolina, I thought they should have been up maybe 17-7 or so at the half. They obviously weren't. You wondered, all right, is it going to kind of continue where Carolina just takes control? Or are you going to look back and say, man, they should have taken better advantage of their chances there? So they really took control in the second half, won the game going away. Kentucky tacks on one at the end. But then Carolina, special teams again, recovers the onside kick. And just a little bit of a ugly game, I would say, overall. But a win nonetheless for South Carolina, and one they will certainly take. We'll tell you about Clint Hammond here in a second. But Chris, I guess like we always do, let's go big picture and then let's dial in on a couple of things. Your big picture thoughts on this victory and really just what it means for South Carolina to be 4-2 right now going into the break, as opposed to 3-3 and 0-3 in the SEC, man.
Yeah, I think, man, just going back to before the game, we talked about the reasons why this game was so important for South Carolina. And now that they've won, you can go back to those same reasons, I think. Let's take any of the emotional stuff out of it. There's a lot of emotional stuff to this game, but you mentioned, you hit it right there. Winning your first conference game of the season, as opposed to being 0-3 going into the bye week and then having to turn around and play A&M and the rest of this stretch. That's big. The first, road win, it's over a ranked opponent, just in general for Shane Beamer, right? Those are two big items. And then the fact that, look, Kentucky, quite honestly, has owned this series lately. And there have been some massively disappointing games for South Carolina, including last season at home, where you lose 16-10. You outplayed Kentucky in some ways in that game in terms of getting turnovers, getting the ball in plus territory, and obviously they couldn't convert. And so being able to do that and kind of reverse this series, I think, was big. You're playing on the road at night against a team with a good defense, and you do some good things offensively in it. We'll dive into all that, but I think from just an on-field perspective, it was really good to see South Carolina. You're right. Should have been up more early, probably, arguably. But they were able to answer, I think, some adversity in that game. Then you zoom out and you look at the emotional aspect of it. Aside from just the good feeling of being able to come up and score this win against Kentucky when they have had so much success in the series, you take all the off-field stuff, the sunglasses comments with Mark Stoops, and we'll probably talk about that more later. But I think that factored in a lot. You could tell this one meant a lot to Shane Beamer. I think about the Auburn game last year and how much that had to mean to Shane Beamer, because a couple of Auburn's coaches last season had left his coaching staff to go basically choose Auburn over you. South Carolina goes out and wins that one. That had some extra meaning. I think this one had even more. And you saw that, I think, out of Shane Beamer in the post game. And even, man, the stuff that, quite honestly, I didn't really think about that as much. The day of the Red River rivalry, Spencer Rattler, Shane Beamer finding out, and I wrote a series on this offseason, but obviously the last time South Carolina was on the road in Lexington was the night that Shane Beamer found out that he was going to get the win. That was not a good night for South Carolina on the field. This one was. So many storylines. We could just go, I think, on and on about why this win was so significant for South Carolina in more ways than one. And one last one, Peyton just pointed this out on Facebook. I mean, now you're at 4 wins, right? So we talked about it before the game, and that this is a tough game, Will Levis or no Will Levis, but it also probably represented one of your more winnable games out of the rest of the schedule. So now South Carolina gets it. Now they're 4-2, and they've got a few opportunities in front of them to get back to bowl eligibility this season, which would be another good step for this program.
Yeah, I think it just takes a lot of the pressure off, man, going into the bye week. You could tell the fan base, they had hit the part of the season where they were pretty frustrated. Even with the 2 wins, 2 blowout wins over Charlotte and SC State, I feel like some people almost tried to maybe provide too much context in those 2 wins instead of just enjoying a couple of nice days at the park and just being able to, all right, you beat up on a couple teams, you played a bunch of guys, you did what you were supposed to do. We heard a lot of, well, it was just Charlotte, it was just SC State, and so the fan base, I feel like if it would have been the opposite, you go into the bowl game, excuse me. You go into the bye week, and that's what I get for trying to read things while I'm talking. So go ahead and do it. Shout out to our boy Greg Lee for dropping a 10 spot on the tip line here. That's really generous of you, Greg. I saw this big yellow box pop up, and it just completely caught my attention. But you go into the bye week really with 2 weeks of positivity now, as opposed to 2 weeks of just, talk about Beamer and talk about the offense. And again, 0-3 in the SEC and all these different things that just kind of drag you down mentally, I feel like, to, having some fun with the sunglasses thing, having, some excitement around the program again. You have an A&M team coming in a couple of weeks, and, we don't need to get into to them yet, but just as far as the big picture here, context, it's like, okay, you now go into that game. They haven't been great. You're going to have an excellent environment. It was announced today, a little bit of news today, 7:30 kickoff for that game, another night game. I think the fans all of a sudden are going to be extremely excited. They may smell blood in the water as far as, a chance to maybe finally beat A&M. So just the entire feel around the program, the vibe right now, I think shifts a bit. And as opposed to the other side, which would have just been an immense amount of negativity and pressure, I feel like, going into this bye week.
Yeah, and let me not get too far ahead, but you said something that triggered this thought. I wanted to make sure I say it. Can you imagine the feeling of being able for South Carolina to follow this high with beating A&M finally at night at home, and then being able to follow it up the next week potentially with a bowl clinching win over an SEC East opponent? That would be almost that'd be almost hard to handle, I think, in terms of positivity. So that's way far ahead, though. But yeah, man, I mean, it was, look, there was a lot of good in this game, and I think a big takeaway on the field was that South Carolina was able to manage the ups and downs of the game, right? You go back to the block punt. South Carolina blocks that punt. Then Marshawn Lloyd runs for 11 yards on the first play. And I'm going, if they punch it in here for a touchdown, it is early, but you're like, that might be game over given the circumstances. Well, instead they fumble. The one thing you can't do. Mm-hmm. Kentucky ends up tying it up later. You go into the half, as you said, man, going, was that a few big missed opportunities that are really going to spell doom? But it wasn't. They were able to come in and play even better in the second half. Chris Rodriguez got his yards for Kentucky, as I expected him to. but they were able to do what they needed to do, and that is they were able to buckle down in key situations on third down and completely dominate the line of scrimmage. I thought they did pretty well with that offensively, but defensively, it really stood out. Zach Pickens had a huge game. Heck, I thought the whole starting defensive line with Tonka Hemingway, Gilbert Edmond, Jordan Birch, all those guys played very well. There were some plays in there, quite frankly, Wes, that I think even if Will Levis was in the game, remember, Kentucky had still given up 19 sacks this season. It's not like Will Levis was the only ingredient there. I think there were plays that he would have struggled to get away from in that game. And so a lot of credit to South Carolina's defensive front. I think a lot of their defenders really stepped up and played their best game. South Carolina didn't get a ton of offensive possessions, but they were able to execute the simple stuff pretty well. They made some big explosive plays, and they made enough plays to win the game.
Yeah, and this was one of those. It felt like an old school SEC football game. Was kind of fun actually, just to see the teams, huddle up, go to the line of scrimmage. You saw lots of shifts and motions on both sides. Exactly what you kind of thought, I think, from just a game flow standpoint. And that was kind of fun. And I think, man, what you saw was a South Carolina team that once again won the special teams battle, I think. And I agree. I don't want to, I guess we're about 10, 11 minutes in. I don't want to really harp on anything negative, but I hated the empty set on that second and down that ended up being, the fumble. And it wasn't executed properly either. Like, it wasn't one of those things where, it's just completely a bad call. Like, if it was executed better, maybe somebody walks in for a touchdown. But I was sitting there saying, give the ball to one again. And let's turn this to a positive. One, Marshawn Lloyd looks like a feature back in this conference. And, man, you go back to last year, even just from a statistical standpoint, the yards per carry for Marshawn were just not there. And I think we all looked and we knew he just didn't quite look himself as he came back from the knee last year. And, then he runs over SC State, runs over Charlotte, and we all were saying, okay, he looks as good as he has. And now the question was, can he do this against an SEC defense? And, I thought there were still too many busts up front. Like, there were still too many negative runs, I think. But the ability for your running game to sort of, for the most part, control the game offensively against an SEC defense. Beamer talked about this on the teleconference last night, that they felt like they could run the football against SEC teams. They just needed to go do it. And, they saw some signs of life against Arkansas and Georgia. And this time they stuck to it. So I think, I look at Lloyd and I say, he is now who you thought he was when you recruited him, and he was like the 5-star or high 4-star, depending on the service guy that you landed. And Chris, I thought he ran well between the tackles too. Like, that's an element of his game that maybe isn't always highlighted as like his strong suit and his skill set. But if you add that in now to the other things we've seen him do on the edges and with space, to me, it makes him an even more just deep player as far as the number of things he can do within his skill set.
We've learned more about this team since game one. Like, game one, you remember that, man, after Georgia State, South Carolina wins by 3 touchdowns. Offense doesn't play very well. Kind of a here we go again. But because of the competition level, that was one game, right? The competition level after that, Georgia on the road at Arkansas, and then the complete opposite direction, SC State, Charlotte. Still didn't really know a lot, in my opinion, about this offense. Is it an elite offense? No. But is it better than what we saw in the first couple games of the season? Yeah, I think so. And is there some of the same explosive potential we saw against Arkansas and certainly against lesser competition, SC State and Charlotte? Is that still there? Yes. And so what we have learned is, Juice Wells and Jalen Brooks are the most dangerous receivers. We saw that Saturday night. And the offense probably should run through as much as possible Marshawn Lloyd, meaning he needs to touch the ball a good bit of the time, a majority of the time. South Carolina was out without Christian Beal-Smith in this game, but you would think that Marshawn Lloyd was going to touch the ball a lot regardless. And I think South Carolina's staff made a decision of, we're going to stick with the run. There were several, you said negative plays, man. I mean, first quarter alone, or maybe it's first half, I had like 3 or 4 -4 runs for Marshawn Lloyd jotted down, just looking over the play chart. But, you know, and you're going to have those probably against Kentucky. They play very aggressively. They had some good calls on at times. They penetrated in the backfield sometimes, but they stuck with it. And what we saw was a combination of explosive runs from Marshawn Lloyd, a lot of yards after contact, and we saw him, like you said, add that element of running between the tackles and being able to grind out a few yards here and there. So I thought he had probably the best game we've seen from him top to bottom. He showed off again. He can be an asset in the receiving game. And so I think the focus has narrowed a little bit for South Carolina's offense. Everybody talks about identity. I think we have a little bit more of that now. We certainly know who has done the best with their touches, right? And what kind of the roles are. And so, look, man, this was a good Kentucky defense. You know, I mean, the game plan and style for Kentucky, did they call things differently because Will Levis wasn't in the game? Probably. And did that affect your ability to play complementary football for them? Probably. But defensively, they're still quite good. They got J.J. Weaver back for the game, who's their best pass rusher. Yeah, they're missing Jacquez Jones, but what did we hear from Nick Roush at KSR last week? Jacquez Jones's backup is a really good player against the run. And so the fact that South Carolina was able to find some things, they executed simple well, and then they executed things like the reverse call, which was I thought a really gutsy call and a well-executed call. So all around, I mean, really good performance from Marshawn Lloyd, and I think continues to show why he was so highly regarded and why he needs the ball a lot in this offense.
Yeah, and I thought they blocked on the perimeter very well, man. You look at the house call for Juice Wells on the sort of quick receiver screen out there. Of course, the reverse. You got a bunch of guys out there just blocking their tails off. You know, the Marshawn Lloyd runs. You know, he had the 45-yarder where he bounced off a tackle. That was it was a weird play in that you had great penetration by one Kentucky player, but once Marshawn made him miss, you know, sometimes you got multiple guys back there. The 4th and 2, Kentucky had like 4 or 5 guys in the backfield, and they just blew that play up completely. That play, it was a perfect example of kind of, you normally want all 11 guys doing their job, and it was like 10 guys were doing their job correctly. But one guy, you know, shoots through, but once Marshawn made him miss, everything else was completely open. And then you have great blocking down the field. Marshawn himself, without the football, has improved a ton as a football player, man. Like he had a guy on skates at one point in one of those long plays down the field blocking. Dylan Wanham had a great downfield block. Antoine Wells had an interesting downfield block that got sort of talked about quite a bit on the broadcast as far as whether or not it was, I would say, within the rules, the new rules that they're trying to cut down on. I'll say it like this, Chris. It didn't get called, so it wasn't a penalty. But I bet in film on Sunday, they said Antoine or Juice, they said great effort, great physicality, good job getting a downfield block. However, next time, let's do that a little bit differently. I imagine is how it went because by the letter of the law, that could have been called. But man, so the things I circled, and we talked about this on 107.5, was obviously Marshawn Lloyd. I thought David Spalding was fantastic, getting inserted back into the lineup. You know, I thought, as you already said, defensive line as a whole, particularly getting after the passer and, you know, in the passing game, fantastic. And they had a lot of guys to the ball. It wasn't just like one guy breaks through and that maybe gives the quarterback an opportunity to get away. at times you had 2-3 guys in the backfield that, so they were able to clean up some of these plays and create sacks as opposed to just pressure. Obviously, you talked about Juice Wells, Jalen Brooks, really good half of the season so far that continued into this game. And Pete Limbo's special teams, man. I thought, they didn't capitalize on the block punt. Again, to your point, that game was borderline over if South Carolina goes up 14-0 off the bat. And I really, really would have liked to have seen what would have happened if South Carolina would have just said, look, we are going to try to send a message by running the ball directly down your throat to go up 14. Because I feel like that's not only you're up 14, but it would have been a message in how you did it as well, which is what I would have liked to have seen, just to see, maybe it gets blown up like the 4th and 2. Who knows?
Yeah.
But would have been interesting to find out. Man, let's talk about the special teams, even though the block punt didn't result in points. Just overall, South Carolina special teams were a big difference, I feel like, in who won this game.
Well, I got to properly credit you because I didn't even think about it this way, but they won every single special teams category, right? I mean, made their field goal, underrated storyline that South Carolina, maybe you don't expect it to be this way the remainder of the season, but Mitch Jeter has been extremely solid. That was a big concern coming in with losing Parker White. Josh Vaughn, I merged Van and punt. Josh Van had a nice punt return. Kentucky didn't do much with Barry and Brown, who Pete Limbo was very concerned about, or very cognizant of. I don't know if he's concerned is the right word. Very cognizant of and talked about a lot heading into the game. He's very speedy. He can really hurt you in the return game. They bottled him up. You had the block punt. Kentucky missed their field goal. South Carolina recovered the onside kick, like you mentioned early in the show. So really, from top to bottom, they did everything well in this game. And man, here's something I was just thinking about just halfway through the season. It's really crazy, almost unbelievable that South Carolina can be that good on special teams, that dangerous. Because opposing teams have to know not only is South Carolina going to be really solid, right? Like they're very good in coverage. They're not extremely explosive in the return game, but they can pop some returns. But the biggest thing you have to worry about is them faking something on you. One of the little, 2-point type plays that they run, or blocking a punt. You have to be very concerned about those. And they're going to try. And yet they're able to have success at this high of a clip. The fact that they're able to do that Pete Limbo has his guys that well coached up is really impressive.
Chris, I wonder how much of the fact that they've blocked so many punts, you're not just scheming those guys open, for lack of a better word, every time. To block a punt, you almost need an error from your opponent. But at the same time, it is not a coincidence if you've blocked 5 in 6 games. But I almost wonder, like on that block punt, how much of this is a mental thing becoming a physical thing, in that the guys now know that they can block a punt. Like they've seen their teammates block a punt. Like Carolina went after that punter on the one they got, like their life depended on it. Like it wasn't just let me rush in here and throw my hands up. We've all kind of seen guys go after a punt, just through, football watching in general. Guys go after a punt, but it's kind of just, I'm going to throw my hands up. It's not really like a all-out effort thing. I dare say, and by the way, shout out to King Ford, I dare say if he doesn't get there, somebody else might have. Like Carolina just swarms the punter, and they have had, a running into the punter here or there. But I almost feel like they're not real worried about that. They're like, we are going after this thing. And, I think there's a lot of buy-in. Beamer mentioned Zach Pickens on the PAT block team. He he came within about a couple of inches of blocking a PAT attempt from Kentucky. So, but I got to say, man, we all talk about the fun stuff, the blocks, the fakes, the little PAT gadgets they have where they go for two. But Pete Limbo had some very pointed comments on Wednesday talking to the media where he said, look, I want to see my guys give all out effort, paraphrasing here, and I want to see better technique. I'm sure, Pete Limbo's a perfectionist. Like if we were sitting there and film, I'm sure there was things he could have pointed out, but he had to go to bed on Saturday night feeling pretty good about just the totality of what his units did. And man, I feel like just making your field goal versus missing your field goal in a game like this just completely changed the flow of it, because you're talking to the difference in what Kentucky potentially going into the half leading, and then the Carolina field goal made it a 2-score game. Once it got put into a position where Kaya Sharon was going to have to chase points, where Kentucky was going to have to be a little more throw oriented, like it got later and later, that completely changed it, because you knew you were sitting there. If Kentucky has to throw the ball and Carolina knows they have to throw the ball, Kentucky has no chance, because Carolina's front sort of smell blood in the water there. So I think that 6 point, it's just a 6-point swing. Modern football tells us that's not really a huge deal. In this game, 6-point swing felt like a 14-point swing to me.
I did. And when you've got two teams that are fairly evenly matched, it's critical. And so when you can win for South Carolina, special teams is a true third phase of the game. I know I say this a lot, but a lot of coaches just say, oh, it's a third of the game. We spend a bunch of time on it. They really don't. A lot of teams don't have. Kentucky, I think Wes has somebody called a co-special teams coordinator who's a position coach, but I didn't see another guy that has a co. So I guess he's co with like everybody else. I don't know how that works. But South Carolina, if you're not good there, if you don't emphasize it, they will expose you. Pete Limbo will expose you. We've seen enough to know that. And so when you can win every single phase within that one phase, all the little sub phases, I guess, of special teams, it's going to show up, especially, in a game like this. And so I think the South Carolina special teams is kind of the perfect merger of a few different things. One, the players know what to do. They understand it. Two, they're able to go out there and play fast while they're doing it. And three, they give maximum effort while they're doing it. And so, like Carolina, from what I'm recalling, I think earlier in the game, they sent a punt pressure, and I think about 3 guys got kind of near the punter. And I don't know if it was the very next one, but at some point, I think it was the very next one, they send some guys, and they probably made some type of adjustment based on what they saw from Kentucky. And now it's 4 guys at the ball, and 2 of them got through. But you can see even in that, everybody does their job. The 2 players in the middle took on the 2 protectors. The other 2 guys are running to the football, and they're running with max effort, but they're tight. They are exactly where they're supposed to be. They're going around the shield at an angle right towards the punter. And the punter just basically drops it in King Ford's lap there. I mean, he's right over the ball. He doesn't even have to dive. He's just there. So it's really something to see. And I think, man, I mean, we can stay on special teams if you want, but offensively and defensively, I thought South Carolina executed simple better in this game too than we've seen, but also made some big plays. Some of the more difficult plays also they were able to make in this game.
Yeah, and we'll close out special teams, but I think, man, when you're that good across all the special teams units, and that's the weird thing about special teams, really, it gets grouped into one thing, but it's so many different units. You have your punt return. Even within that, you have, are you punt return, or you punt block, or you punt safe? But you have your punt return, your punt team. You have your kickoff coverage, your kickoff team, your field goal team, your field goal block. So you have all these different phases that are within that one phase of the game. If you're pretty good on multiple phases, on most of your phases, you're like, in this case for Carolina, really good. That's a lot of that is coaching, and a lot of that is, to give Beamer credit, not just creating lip service to special teams, but actually backing it up. Somebody brought this up to me the other day that was like around the program and at practice at times, and just said, look, they spend a heck of a lot of time of their allotted practice time on true special teams work. And I think, man, it obviously shows. They were great in special teams last year, great this year. 5 kickoffs, by the way, for Mitch Jeter, and 5 touchbacks. So Varian Brown, no opportunities in the kickoff return game. He had 1 punt return for 11 yards. Carolina had a punt return for 18 yards. So even in that case, they won that yardage swing, by 7 yards, if you want to count it like that. So I don't know, man. It's just really fun, really impressive to watch, and even just the stuff that's generally an afterthought to the fans and media, having your field goal operation be perfect or be at least solid. I mean, we've seen Kentucky struggle with that, and it was a factor on that missed field goal for them on Saturday as well. So kudos to everybody involved in the special teams and the guys that don't get to start, don't get to play on offense or defense, but still go out there and give everything they have on special teams. Pretty special stuff, man. Let's see. Defensively, we talked about the defensive line. Sherrod Green got a game ball at linebacker from South Carolina. Let's see. Dude, how about David Spalding, Nick Emmanwori, DQ Smith. They played the straight up entire game on defense. How about, speaking of identity, we talk about identity maybe too much, but Chris, I sort of speculated before the game. Well, are we going to see some 4-3? Are we going to see some 3-4/5-2, however you want to call it from a semantic standpoint? Are we going to see Tonka Hemingway at defensive end / edge, whatever you want to call it? No to all of the above.
Right.
Like when they're married to their 4-2-5, when they are all in on their 4-2-5, when they are committed to their 4-2-5, I mean, it is 100% committed to it. I don't know, man. Rewatching the game, I'm sure there were maybe a couple of goal line spots, I guess, but they were in the 4-2-5. Like, now they had guys up near the line of scrimmage. They had basically when Kentucky was in their 2 tight end sets, your nickel back and then one of your safeties is up in the box to make it an 8-man front. And even the deep safety didn't seem like he was maybe as deep as normal at times. But personnel, Chris, Clayton White put all the faith in the world in his guys and said, we might get gashed a few times. They're going to get their yardage in the run, but we're going to keep our athleticism on the field as opposed to going jumbo and getting some bigger guys out there.
And narrowed the rotation really among everyone. I mean, Stone Blanton played a bit. Debo Williams, I think, played 5 snaps, but it was mostly Sherrod Green, who I thought played quite well, and Brad Johnson. Up front, Gilbert Edmond played a ton, and then Pickens, Hemingway. I mean, they rotated a little bit at D tackle, but the guys played a lot. You mentioned, I mean, look, we talk about Kentucky injuries. I mean, South Carolina still didn't have R.J. Roderick and Devontae Reed, who both opened the season as starters. So you've got Nick Emmanwori, and as good as he's been, especially against the run, he's a true freshman. So he's playing his second SEC road game ever. He's out there. DQ Smith plays every snap at nickel, a guy who started his career as a safety after not playing DB since the 8th grade. He's out there as your nickel. And Spalding, who played a lot last season for South Carolina, but he's playing safety, for the first time in his Gamecock career and making a difference. So, and I thought Cam Smith and Darius Rush had the huge play, first play of the game that I've rewatched a bunch of times. Can't get over how good of a play that was. And Cam Smith, I mean, I didn't hear a lot about Cam during the game, but that shows you how well he played. I mean, Cam and Darius Rush, I thought were really good at corner as well. So, yeah, they put things together quite nicely on defense. They give up some yards, yeah, but mostly between the 20s, Wes. I mean, the late touchdown from Kentucky ended up being inconsequential, and I thought they played really well. They dominated this game up front on the line of scrimmage on defense.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a game, y'all, where maybe the depth at linebacker gets tested, the depth on the front gets tested. Like, I thought they were maybe going to have to feel like they needed to rotate a lot. Some of that was Kentucky didn't have a ton of plays, so I think maybe Carolina just felt like, hey, our guys are getting rested, so keep the frontline guys out there. It seemed like Ben Martin Scott played a little bit more down the stretch late in the game. Felt like maybe once Kentucky kind of had to throw the ball. I don't know if that was just that it was later in the game or more of a matchup thing. They had Ben Martin Scott in there in the fourth quarter, which was interesting. But man, they had the one of the safeties up near the line of scrimmage so often that I didn't realize Spalding was playing safety. I actually, to be completely honest, watching the game live, it took a while. Like I thought they had slid DQ back to safety and were playing Spalding at nickel because they had them both like parked up near the line of scrimmage, and they were. It was kind of like we're gonna stick to our personnel, but we're gonna play just all types of guys up near the line. And I think you could. I did make the case. I would say I did make the case. Maybe they need to go a bit bigger personnel wise in this game. But I think what they were maybe thinking was, look, all of our guys are comfortable in this 4-2-5, comfortable with what we do. And, there could be some downside. You're playing a quarterback who's in his first year or first start, I should say. And, if you go too far into all right, stop the run, let's go super heavy, you maybe in turn just make things easy on him as opposed to keeping your athleticism and your base package on the field. And Kentucky did run some 3 receiver sets. It wasn't like they were just in, the eye or in 2 tight ends the whole way. But Chris, I just thought that was a very interesting game plan decision. And it surprised me a little bit, to be honest. I thought at the very least we were going to see Tonka at the edge, but they did that against Georgia. Since then, it's really been Tonka inside, and he had a great game, man. Like probably his best game, I think. Just thinking back on it, probably his best game as a Gamecock. But I wonder also, does that just speak to their continued growing confidence in the job Gilbert Edmond is doing at the edge spot?
I think would it be a stretch to say that every starting defensive lineman had his best game? I mean, I don't know. Zach Pickens has had a pretty lengthy career. We'd have to go back and think. But Zach Pickens, I went back and looked at the PFF grades, and it's a great resource. I was not on the PFF grades as much this time. Zach Pickens, I mean, I don't remember what his grade was. It was not high enough. He caused issues. I mean, he was constantly in the backfield, whether it was getting penetration on the run, forcing something to another lane, splitting guys, getting in the backfield and pass rush. He was excellent. Jordan Burch was very disruptive. Gilbert Edmond played the most snaps he's ever played, and I thought he did some really good things, finished some plays. And Tonka, I mean, his recovers the opening fumble, had a sack. I mean, he played really well. So it was I expected South Carolina's defensive line to be able to have some success if they got in some passing situations against Kentucky, just because of Kentucky's offensive line's been porous. I didn't expect that dominant of a performance, though, and they certainly put it on. So, yeah, man, I think, It might have been with the 4-2-5. They're still not where they would like to be depth-wise, right? Like when we saw some of the 5-man against Arkansas, that was when they still had Jordan Strong, right? Boogie Huntley was healthy. Boogie missed this game. Tonka settled in inside. You still don't have Jordan Strong. So it might have been, hey, this is our best chance. And I still think, maybe some fans disagree with me. Maybe some Kentucky fans would come in here and yell about this. A lot of the stuff that Kentucky did, even in the passing game for Kaya Sharon, in concept was still pretty similar to what we've seen Will Levis run. And I thought that even with Sharon in the game, as inexperienced as he is, I thought that even if Will Levis was in the game, he would have struggled with some of the pressure that South Carolina was able to bring. It was pretty overwhelming at times.
Well, and man, the whole reason you don't have Will Levis is because he's been getting hit all year long. So, let's not pretend the injury happens in a vacuum. Like, I know injuries, there is a certain amount of luck that goes into an injury. Don't get me wrong, but when your guy is getting hit all year long, 19 sacks coming into the game, there are consequences to that. And in this case, it came in the form of injuries to your starting quarterback. So it is weird. I understand the guy's a projected first round pick. It is a little bit weird to me how much the quarterback aspect of this has been talked about when you consider Carolina played 4 freaking quarterbacks last year and never had their QB1 at full health for the entire season. So nobody should feel guilty about winning the game with Kentucky not having their quarterback. For another thing, why, if you want to talk about Kentucky, why had Kaya Sharon not got to throw a pass halfway through the season? Whose fault is that? It's your own coaches for not getting the backup ready. And it's your own fault for not beating teams enough to where you can put your backup in. So whose fault is that you don't have a backup and don't have a guy? You couldn't get him reps in. I mean, this was the 6th game of the season. You couldn't get him a little bit of time on the field. Like, are you serious right now?
They beat Youngstown State 31-0. No place in that game. Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I've thought about it too. If you're that established as a program, why do you not have a backup quarterback that's never thrown a pass? I mean, it's been talked about at Oklahoma this year, right? They lost Dylan Gabriel, and now their backup has thrown a pass, but I think it was like he didn't win the backup job at Pitt or something like that. If you're that established, look at what South Carolina had to do last year. Luke Doty's not a projected first-round pick or whatever, but he was not healthy in the Kentucky game. Okay? Then they had to get creative. They pulled a grad assistant who has thrown a pass in college, many passes, out of coaching to play for them. They
love you, Zeb.
They got a transfer ready in Jason Brown. They started to carry on Joyner in the bowl game. Figure it out. You have other options, and if you don't have other options, you should have options. And Mark Stoops even said it after the game, man. I have a lot of thoughts on what Stoops did or did not say leading up to and after the game. But he even said, nobody's going to feel sorry for us. And he's exactly right. Every team that played South Carolina last year and beat them, their coaches didn't get up there and their fans didn't go say, well, South Carolina, poor South Carolina. They've been beat up and stuff. We probably should. No, they beat South Carolina and they reveled in it. And that's exactly what the Gamecocks should do here. If you're that established, you should have a better quarterback situation or be able to get him ready. And you should be able to have enough guys around your quarterback. The strength is your running game and your defense anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those didn't play as well on Saturday.
Yeah, and here's the thing, man. Not that you can just create a quarterback out of thin air. Like, I get it. Sometimes you go into a season, even if you're established, sometimes you go into a season and you say, hey, this position is thin. But that doesn't stop you from getting the guy reps. I mean, you mentioned it. Craig mentioned it as well. The game against Youngstown State, which I cannot say that word all of a sudden. How do you not get the guy in the fourth quarter and get him a few throws? Like, I don't understand. That's completely on you as a coaching staff for not having him ready. So, I mean, and I'm not talking to like the people listening or the people in the chat, but certain people have a way of just trying to explain away South Carolina's success as opposed to just accepting it when you do something right and something goes right. People are still explaining away, well, it was a bowl win. It was in a bowl game. Or, Florida was in a bad spot last year. They had started to give up on the season. Who cares? Like, you don't when other teams get wins, we don't provide all this context. Well, that win doesn't count because of this and that and this and that. No, you play who you got, and you either win or you lose, and that's what goes on your record. So, Carolina won the game. They're 4-2. They're probably, it is weird, Chris. I was about to say they're right where we thought they would be. Then I was about to say they're a little ahead of where it's weird how one game can like change your perspective on where a season is. But we see this every year, man. Halfway point, like every season's a roller coaster. Like Carolina's going to have some moments against teams people don't expect them to beat, even in the final 6 games. And they're going to have some moments where they look really bad against teams we think they should beat. Like that's the way sports are. That's the way football is. So, but ultimately, you are what happens on the field. You are your record. So they're 4-2. They've had some good moments. They've had some not good moments. But enjoy the 4. And Kentucky fans, sorry, you lost. It is what it is. The game is over. You can't change it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're going to bottom line it, as a South Carolina fan, and there's nothing wrong with this, rightfully so, all the games, how many games has there been over the past, 4 or 5 years, Wes, where several key guys are injured? You don't go through it, put an asterisk by each of them. No, you say, we lost and I'm mad. So when you're happy, when you win, you're happy. You should be, right? Now, I don't know what direction you want to go in, Wes, but I mentioned
wherever you want to go.
Mark Stoops' direction, since we're a little fired up and having some fun here. Mark Stoops, in his post-game press conference, almost went out of his way to not credit South Carolina whatsoever. And Shane Beamer does his like game week presser leading up to the game on Tuesdays. Stoops does his on Monday. So he talks about the previous game, goes some big picture, talks about the next game. Most of Stoops' Monday press conference last week recapped the Ole Miss game for good reason. A few big picture items, talked about South Carolina a little bit. And he said he didn't mention Shane Beamer at all. I think he said, very good South Carolina team, much improved. He said some nice things about Rattler and Marshawn Lloyd pretty briefly. But in the post game, Wes, he didn't say anything really about Shane Beamer or South Carolina. And I found that odd. We know that the spice leading up to the game, but it was mainly about what Kentucky did. And I contrasted it, Wes, with the previous week. After the Ole Miss game, Stoops talked actually quite a lot about what Ole Miss was doing, what they did on defense that caused them issues, what they did on offense that caused them some issues. After this game, Stoops mentioned Marshawn Lloyd, and he mentioned the reverse play that South Carolina got him on. He said didn't even say South Carolina or Shane Beamer. Said nothing about Beamer. What do we think of that?
I want to know what you think of that because I know you have a take.
I
mean, well, obviously, Chris, there was no spice before actually because according to Mark Stoops, that comment was not about Shane Beamer. Clearly,
dude. How? I mean, come on. I went back today because when I was formulating this in my mind, I wanted to try to be fair, And so thinking through that, I went back and saw the original comment, the original video, what Stoops said after, what Shane Beamer said after. And Stoops tried to say that he was talking about himself. And he mentioned how he put on a hard hat and wore a blue collar shirt to meetings and stuff early in his tenure. And he did. I remember all that stuff. But don't say you're talking about yourself. You mentioned dancing and sunglasses. Now, maybe we unearthed some video or something of Mark Stoops dancing early in his tenure and putting on sunglasses. We're not stupid. You were talking about Shane Beamer. You were. And if you were talking about yourself, then you were saying you did an awful job because you were trying to draw a line between the climate and the culture thing. Now, my theory is, I think Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer are really different. We know this. That's fine. Mark Stoops is more of an old school guy. He's going to talk about being blue collar and blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. It's obviously worked very well. I feel like I've been almost over the top in talking about the job I think Mark Stoops has done at Kentucky. It's been excellent. Shane Beamer has been almost over the top in talking about how good. But Mark Stoops can't say anything positive about the job Shane Beamer's done. And I think he doesn't really have a lot of respect for Beamer or the program. I really do. And maybe the differences in the personalities and the way that they approach things, new school versus old school, kind of precludes him from, I don't really like the way Shane does things. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I thought that was pretty telling. I think he's probably upset about the game in the past couple weeks. He probably doesn't like that Beamer has clapped back at him. But I found it telling, and I found it odd because he can credit Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. But in this game, just because they're missing their quarterback, or I don't know, I found it very odd.
Yeah, and the fact is the video of him didn't really get publicity until, or maybe even get posted. I don't remember exactly. It didn't start rolling around until a little bit later on. But the fact that he said that in an interview, and it was with Marty and McGee, so he was probably feeling pretty comfortable. It wasn't in front of the big crowd of reporters out there, You're a little more comfortable in those situations. And I think the very day that South Carolina puts out the video of Shane Beamer, this is all happening at SEC Media Days. It's happening all at the same time. You're going to just magically talk about dancing and stupid glasses and stuff. We're like you said, we're not stupid. And I mean, at that point, he probably should have just owned it. But you had to know. South Carolina couldn't, if you win this game, you have to clap back at this point. I mean,
yeah,
you asked for it at this point. By the way, maybe Stoops just needs to call Liberty Tax and overcome his taxiety. 803-462-5576. The deadline is coming up if you filed an extension for your taxes this past year. You need to get those knocked out soon, like this week. So call 803-462-5576. You can overcome your taxiety as well with the tax team at Liberty Tax. They've got locations right here in the Columbia area, in actual Columbia, in Irmo, and in Lexington. Again, 803-462-5576. Give our friends at Liberty Tax a shout. I'm with you, man. These coaches, their press conferences, borderline, especially a guy that's been there for 10 years, it's borderline a script. So it would be interesting if you want to go way down this rabbit hole in the bye week to see what his comments were for other coaches on and on and on and on compared to this as well. But I think ultimately, man, sometimes when there are issues, people just get defensive. And when they're defensive, they act a little bit different. Mm-hmm. And I believe, as we have seen all offseason, the reason why Stoops has been so defensive this offseason is that no matter what Kentucky does on the football field, they are still, without a doubt, a basketball school. And I think that just hurts that there's nothing he can do to change that. I brought this up on the 107.5 show, man, but I was trying to do some research on Kentucky, and I went to Google, which is the best search engine currently that the world has to offer. It literally uses artificial intelligence, machine learning, to give you the proper results on what you're looking for. And if you search Kentucky roster, Chris, you will literally get, hopefully y'all can see this. Basketball,
Yeah,
basketball, basketball, basketball. Some stories on basketball, basketball, basketball. What is Kentucky basketball roster? Basketball, basketball, basketball. Let's go to page 2. Basketball, 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 basketball. And on. And on. I'm still literally not seeing a mention of football. There's a football mention in the suggested search. The results, however, completely and entirely basketball. So, Chris, I think that's his issue.
I think that is one of them. Yeah, that is clearly one of them. Shoo. Yeah, that would be funny if you could present your theory to Mark Stoops at a press conference.
I don't think
that's still not resolved there, right? Still unresolved between Stoops and John Calipari. Whew.
It was a weird offseason in Kentucky, man.
It was a very weird offseason. Yeah, there's something to my theory. There is a reason he did not, like, what coach doesn't get up there and say, blah, blah, we did this, how do you not say credit to South Carolina or Shane's done a good job there or something? How do you not say that? There's a reason for it. There's a reason you chose not to say anything. And a lot of it was by your own doing. Kentucky, if you don't think, we didn't have a quarterback, your fault. You mad about the backlash from some dumb comments you made? You made them. You got to own them now. You can't say stuff. If I say something dumb on this podcast, which happens often, I'm sure, people will definitely let me know about it. And that's fine. That's good. That's what it is nowadays.
Indeed. By the way, while we were doing the show, Chris, Shane Beamer named the Bobby Dodd Coach of the – good grief, it's the longest title I've ever seen. The Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Foundation and Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl today announced that South Carolina head football coach Shane Beamer has been selected as the Dodd Trophy Coach of the Week presented by PNC. Whew. Lots of sponsors to get in.
So it just dawned on me as it's 3:00 here on a Monday. I guess Stoops will be having his weekly press conference today.
Yes.
They play next week, right? Yeah, they play Mississippi State, right? Mm-hmm. We will go see. I'm curious, Wes, what do we think? He will probably congratulate Shane Beamer on this award that he's received in the press.
By the way, Mississippi State, pretty good.
Yeah. Would you rather play out of the West this year for South Carolina? Would you rather play A&M than Mississippi State? I say yes.
Never thought we'd be saying that, but I agree, man. Mississippi State is good. That game was on while we were in the studio, and I thought we were watching highlights of the game, and it was just the actual game.
Just a bunch of scores by Mississippi State. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, man. Let's see. What else? We already mentioned 7:30 kickoff, Texas A&M. That's going to be crazy. And by the way, Tonka Hemingway will be on the Feinbaum show at 3:30. No Shane Beamer press conference this week. No Shane Beamer on the call-in show either. I think I saw who are they having, Chris? They're having Luke Day and Derek Moore, I think, filling in. So that should be cool. That should be a good
God, bring your coffee or energy drink of choice to that one to be able to keep up with those guys.
Yeah, and you're gonna walk out of that one motivated though. You maybe don't need coffee. Like you're gonna like, hey, you better fortify your walls there at Backstreet so you're gonna have people running through the wall after listening to them.
Yeah.
Travis mentioning Ra Thomas looking good against Mississippi State. Hey, man, there's a lot of Carolina wide receivers or Carolina wide receiver targets that are doing really, really well out there. Malik Heath makes plays for Ole Miss.
Yep.
So, anyway, that's here nor there. I don't know, man. We're right at the hour mark. Have we hit everything? I mean, I know we got this bye week, so if we missed anything, we can.
Yeah, I was going to say, we probably have not hit everything. We probably got more to say on this game, like even zooming into the game itself or just some big picture items in the rest of the season, of course. But, yeah, well, I think we can hold all that for a different day.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, appreciate y'all joining. Appreciate the big numbers there. It was a little slow getting going, I think, but right now we got a bunch of people on here. So appreciate y'all. Appreciate the support as always. We'll have the Talking Tuesday edition, I think, tomorrow with Mike Uva, normal time. And then Chris and I don't know, man, we'll probably do 1 or 2 later on this week. We'll see. But awesome. Appreciate y'all. We'll see you then.